We're speaking today to the Chair and the Deputy Chair of the Legislative Assembly Legal and Social Issues Committee. The committee recently tabled its final report following an inquiry into organ and tissue donation in Victoria. The committee received almost 50 submissions, held 7 days of hearings and heard from experts, representatives of diverse communities and from donor families themselves. Ella George chairs the committee and Annabelle Cleland is the Deputy Chair. Welcome to you both.
Thank you. Thank you.
Ella, can I start with you? How would you say Victoria is doing relative to other states?
Unfortunately, Victoria is not doing so well when it comes to registering to become an organ and tissue donor. Victoria is at 23% of people living in Victoria who are registered to become a donor, but we're seeing in South Australia that number is high as 72%. So we've got a bit of work to do here in Victoria to get that number up.
And is that the key reason that this inquiry was held?
Yeah, that's right. In the community across Victoria, people are overwhelmingly supportive of organ and tissue donation, and a lot of people would consider themselves potential organ and tissue donors but aren't actually registered.
And so, Annabelle, what did you learn about why it's so important to have a registry, a well-functioning registry?
We heard some remarkable personal stories about how life-changing an organ donation is, and we want to say thank you to everyone who shared their stories with us because I guess that there's such enormous benefit about the quality of life that people received, but also about the personal impact it had from a donor family and the reward it has to think that, that there's a part of that person that goes on to live and contributes to the quality of life of someone else.
And you called the report Register and Talk About It. Why that title, Ella?
Yeah, so we called it Register and Talk About It because throughout the inquiry we heard from so many people, whether it was expert witnesses or families who've made that heartbreaking decision about donating their loved one's organ and tissue, that it's very important to be registered on the Australian Organ and Tissue Donor Register, but it's just as important to have that conversation with your family and to make sure that your family know exactly what your donation wishes are should they be in that position to make that decision.
What happens in that situation where a family is brought into hospital, their loved one is going to die? What did you hear about what happens if their wishes haven't been made known?
I think when you're dealing with a family that's going through grief, by talking about it, you're taking the burden off them to make a decision during that really trying time, that difficult time. So allowing them to just grieve through the process and processing the loss of a loved one, but knowing clearly what the wishes were of that person. So it was really important for us to say that, sharing that information and maybe digitising part of that as well as a form of transfer of information is really, really important. And so it's an avenue that we hope that will support families to make sure that they know what the intentions were of their loved ones and they don't have to make that during really, really difficult times and they can just commence the grief process.
And so one of the things that you've recommended was that registering for a licence should also provide people the opportunity to register for organ and tissue donation. Why is that a good recommendation, do you think?
So up until about 20 years ago, Victoria did have a system where you could register to be an organ and tissue donor through your licence, whether it was applying for your licence or renewing your licence. Unfortunately, that process finished, but what we found in the inquiry is that South Australia still has that in place, and they are miles ahead compared to the rest of the country at about 72% registration rates, and that's essentially attributable to the fact that it is so easy to register in South Australia through the driver's licence system. So that's a key recommendation that we made through this report to look at scoping a driver's licence system just to make it that much easier for Victorians to get registered in the first place.
And so did you find that there were some myths out there that prevented people from registering, that people who might have otherwise wanted to register?
Yeah, sure. So I think the biggest myth and misconception that came to light throughout this inquiry was around stem cell donations and registering to be a stem cell donor. A lot of people think that to become a stem cell or a bone marrow donor, it involves quite an invasive and painful overnight hospital procedure. But in fact, these days, 90% of stem cell donations are done through the blood, through bloodstream. So similar to having a plasma donation or a blood donation, where those stem cells are taken out of the body through a blood donation, separated, and a person's blood is returned. So that was a really big myth that I think we found throughout this inquiry, that it's actually a lot easier to be a stem cell donor than most people think.
We also found that the variety of people that can donate is a lot more varied than what we imagine. It's not just, you know, young, healthy people. So maybe looking at the older demographic that might not think that they're capable of donating was also a big part of it. And I think that just passing on that information is really important. So making a decision and sharing it as well, and how much non-sharing, when you don't share that information, how much that's been a barrier for a decision at the end when you're ready, when people are prepared to make an organ donation.
And you wanted to talk a little bit about the art on the cover of the final report. What's the significance of that?
I think all of us, it was a pretty heavy week of hearings and people shared personal stories, but also the services and the support out there and the expertise in the industry was really remarkable, that people trusted us to share their stories to improve the system, because everyone will benefit, the whole community and the state will benefit. But one that I think brought just about everyone to tears was when we visited the Donor Tissue Bank of Victoria, and on the wall is this beautiful mural with different colours and different names surrounding it, and these are people who have donated their tissue and have been recognised for that generosity. And all of the colours, the green, yellow and red leaves, reflect the cycle and seasons of grief and responses. And I just think that highlighting the generosity of individuals that have donated was really quite powerful, and there's different ways that we explored that we could do that and continue to support our donors.
So now the report has been tabled. What are the next steps? What comes next?
So now the government has about 6 months to respond to the report and the findings and recommendations that we've made. So we're eagerly waiting that as a committee to see what the outcomes of our work are and the impact that it will have on public policy. No, I think we're proud of this. I think that it was an enormous amount of work that went into it, and we're really grateful for everyone who contributed, because it's quite layered. We looked at international experts to make sure that everything that was in this report was really well informed, and I think quite quickly we realised how complex it was. But we've got some really powerful next steps that we hope will genuinely save lives.
That's great. Thank you both for coming in today.
Thank you.